Good morning from Shropshire. This is the beginning of June and I am ready to plant out my dahlias and what seedlings I have left following a period of time where I wasn't able to water them and the majority died. So I'm planting out what's left of them. So they've had a hard start to life and I want to do what's best. And so I'm in a bit of a quandary. Nature wants to keep me on my toes and I'm trying to work out what best to do with my soil to make sure that the seedlings, what remains of the seedlings, have the best start to life, and obviously to make sure that the dahlias excel. My main goals for my gardening is to stay as environmentally conscious as possible, so to improve the soil structure so that I don't need to add chemical fertilisers or anything chemical really, and so I'm following a no-dig approach for that, which means creating my own compost and adding that onto the soil as the main nutritional content to improve the structure and obviously to add nutrition to the soil. But my soil is very clayey, so we have problems with that. My second goal is to be as efficient as possible with the minimum effort. So that means being productive with minimum effort, because let's face it, everybody has a lot to do in life. If you're just a standard gardener like me, just wanting to have somewhere pleasant to come without it being so overwhelming that you don't know what to do and where to start, then that's not much fun. And kind of that's where I am at the moment, because I have my beds ready, but I'm not quite sure what to do next. Let me tell you what the problems are. So, I want to get my soil ready for planting my seedlings. I had hoped that after following a no-dig approach last year, so I did the cardboard on these all of the beds, cardboard, a thick layer of compost, we should be in a good place this year. Last year, it was pretty good. I was able to plant the seeds in no problem. I had good production of flowers, pretty minimal weeds to be honest, and all was well. Now this year I put at the end of last year into the beginning of this year, I put on a new layer of compost, not as thick as previously the last year when I was starting off, just to get that nutritional level back up, and it just seemed to make the weeds flourish, and they were worse than they were all of last summer. So I'm not sure whether it was, well, I obviously did something wrong with the compost. It either didn't get hot enough so that the weed seeds were killed, or I unfortunately had a lot of weed seeds blown into it at the wrong time for the compost from all of the surrounding fields. I don't know, but it was dreadful. Everywhere had grass growing throughout it, and that wasn't the case last year. So I took the decision of covering the beds with weed membrane. So over in that corner over there has got the weed membrane in it, and I've planted the seedlings in it as well. This layer just here is where I'm planning to put my dahlias. That's had the weed membrane down for a considerable length of time. This bed here was where I had my tulips, and I've just cleared the weeds from that, and that's what's made me think that I might need to do something different. So when I planted into the weed membrane over there, I have to say I didn't enjoy the process. And I kind of want to be enjoying the process because that's part of why I'm doing this. I really didn't enjoy making the holes to plant into. Now I know there's a different approach. I was just cutting out the holes with scissors and a knife, whereas I know you can see it into the weed membrane with a heat gun, blowtorch, something like that, and make holes. But I haven't got a template to do that, and I don't trust myself with a blowtorch, so that may still happen yet. I might still come to that if this doesn't work. But I really didn't enjoy that process. And so I'm not looking forward to doing it here. So since planting those out, literally within an hour of planting them into the weed membrane, we had a massive storm, and it more rain than there ever has been in the space of a couple of hours that I've ever seen in the last 10 years. We had floods all over the roads, everything. So they were well watered in, but there was also hail and everything. So there was a lot of damage. So they've been challenged themselves, those little seedlings. Since then, we've had a mini heat wave. So it might not look it today, but it's still going to be hot later on. So I need to get the compost out and the hard work done this morning while it's cool. But since then, the mini heat wave. So now that I have weeded out the tulip bed, it's really quite dry and compacted. So if I just delve into the soil, I mean, it's not too bad, but it's definitely seen better days. I mean, there is a fine tilth to it. It's not too bad. Plants will grow in it, obviously. I can see weed seedlings growing in it. So things will grow. It's just not going to be the best start to life that the seedlings will have. So the seedlings will grow, but because they're only recovering from the forced drought that I gave them in the last 2 weeks, I really want to provide them with a bit more, a better start to life, shall we say. So I'm in a quandary. I didn't enjoy sowing into the weed membrane. So for the dahlias, because their tubers are lots of different sizes, I had already made the decision that I am lifting up the weed membrane. That can become the path in this bed. And I'm going to plant directly into the soil. I will put a boost of compost down so that they've got a little bit extra to go into, but I'll be planting the tubers straight into the soil. The quandary then was going to be in the tulip bed. Initially, when I was planning back in January, the plan was to lift all of the dahlias, all of the tulips, and the dahlias would go into the bed where the tulips were. And actually, timing-wise, that's worked out perfectly. The tulips are ready to be cleared out, and the dahlias are ready to go in. However, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave the tulips in the ground. I am going to experiment. And this is going to be a season of experimentation this year because I haven't got to the best start. So I'm just going to try lots of different things and see what works. So the tulips are going to stay in. And the reason I'm doing that is because I should get flowers next year. I'm not trying to sell the flowers, so they don't need to be perfect. They don't need to be super long. So the theory is you only get one good flower out of the tulip, and after that they're a little bit more diminished year on year. These were really great this year, so I'm willing to take the risk that even if they're marginally worse next year, then they'll still be good enough for me. So I'm going to keep those in the soil. That means one less job to do. And obviously, if they're already in the soil, I don't want to be planting the dahlias on top of that. So the dahlias are going into the next bed. Now, the tulips are deep enough down, the tulip bulbs are deep enough down into the ground that I could plant my annuals in there, and they're probably not going to affect them that much. Certainly, the weeds were thoroughly growing everywhere, and it made no difference to the tulip production. So I am going to plant seedlings on top of the tulips, and the tulips will remain in situ. So really all that stands in the way is as to what I'm doing with the top layer of soil. Will I effectively start a new no-dig bed effectively, so put cardboard down to stop any weed seeds that were in the tulip bed from growing? Or do I, and then put compost down and plant the seedlings into that compost? Or do I just put the compost down? And I think I am going to have an experiment that is, I have one bed at the moment that's got the weed membrane in, so that should cover off no weeds growing in there. So that will give me an idea of that. So whether the effort in doing that weed membrane outweighs the reduction in weeds that will ensue. For the dahlia bed, I am going to plant the dahlias into the compost as it is now, with a bit more compost on them, and I am going to cover it in a fairly thin layer of straw. And again, the straw will be acting as a weed suppressant. Now, I have found in the past with the straw that it is also a massive slug attractor. So, which isn't a great thing with dahlias, but fortunately my dahlias have been sprouting for some time. There are no tender shoots, as far as I can see, that will attract the slugs. So I'm hoping that would be safe. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that for the seedlings that I'm going to plant, because I think that might be too much of a risk. So I am going to have 3 different beds. One with the weed membrane, one with the straw as a weed suppressant, and then what I'm calling the tulip bed. That will have the compost. That will have, I think I'm going to do a layer of cardboard so that I'm not impacted by the weed seeds that I've just put in there. Compost, and then nothing else. And we'll see how much weeds are created from in those 3 beds. They're all in a similar position. They're far enough away from the field and the hedges that they shouldn't be too affected by the weeds that are going on there, hopefully. And then once we see what's happening with that, that will then feed my decision-making process for when I come to redo the biennial bed and the extra bed that's on the end with the seedlings that are growing now. So hopefully, I'm not sure that made it clear to me. My decision-making process is based on 2 goals. One, I want the soil to end up being as good as possible. So I want to build up the structure, I want to build up the microorganisms in it, I want to add nutrients to it. I'm doing that by adding the compost and not doing digging. So I'm following a no-dig or no-till approach. So that's the first one done. So in all 3 of those, that's what I've done. Secondly, my main goal for life in the garden is to be as efficient as possible. So minimising the effort it takes me to produce as much as I can. And so that means the minimum weeding possible and the minimum care, tending, whatever. And so these 3 beds with following 3 different approaches to creating them will hopefully show me, for my type of soil, what will work best. So that's going to be me busy for the next few days, planting the dahlias and sowing the seedlings in this bed.